Commander Maya Reyes had never imagined she'd die with a collar around her neck. The neural dampening band cut into her skin as she staggered forward, pushed by the butt of a plasma rifle. The massive Vrexian guard 9 feet of armored exoskeleton and mandibles chittered something that the translation implant in her ear rendered as, "Move, pet. Pet." The word burned worse than the collar. Maya stumbled but didn't fall. 5 months in captivity had taught her that falling meant pain. The Vrexians didn't tolerate weakness in their biological specimens, not even in the ones they considered barely sentient. The corridor opened into an enormous chamber that resembled an amphitheater. Thousands of Vrexians occupied the tiered seating, their chitinous bodies gleaming under the blue-tinted lights. The chamber hummed with the clicking of mandibles and the rustling of appendages, the sound of anticipation. In the center of the chamber stood a raised dais where High Admiral Xel surveyed the proceedings. The translation implant couldn't fully convey the nuances of Vrexian speech, but Maya had learned to read their body language. Xel's extended upper appendages and splayed sensory filaments signaled pride. Triumph. The human resistance has been crushed, Xel's translated voice boomed across the chamber. Their final outpost on Mars has fallen. Their naval forces have been reduced to debris floating in the void. Their leaders captured or eliminated. The gathered Vrexians rattled their exoskeletons in approval, their equivalent of applause. And now, Xel continued, we bring before you their most decorated military commander. The one they called their final hope. Maya was shoved forward into a circle of light. She blinked against the sudden brightness, taking in the thousands of alien eyes fixed upon her. At 5'9", she felt diminutive compared to the towering Vrexians, but she forced herself to stand straight, shoulders back, chin high. Commander Maya Reyes, Xel announced. Who led the futile defense of their homeworld? Who orchestrated the guerrilla strikes against our supply lines? Who, until now, evaded our forces through what they call ingenuity? The word was spoken with derision, translated with mocking quotation marks. Look upon this creature, Xel instructed the assembly. Study its fragility. Its inefficiency. No exoskeleton. No redundant organs. No natural weaponry. The humans built empires and reached for the stars despite being among the most physically inadequate species we have encountered. Maya kept her expression neutral, even as rage bubbled inside her. The Vrexians had appeared in Earth's orbit 8 months ago, their massive hive ships blotting out the stars. Their ultimatum had been simple: surrender or be eradicated. Humanity had chosen a third option, resist, but the price had been catastrophic. The humans call themselves apex predators, Xel continued, mandibles clacking in what Maya recognized as amusement. Yet they keep actual predators in their dwellings. They feed them, shelter them, collect their waste. They call these creatures pets. A low, rumbling sound spread through the assembly. Vrexian laughter. This behavior puzzled our scientists until we realized humans themselves are meant to be pets. Their emotional attachments, their pack-bonding instincts, their eagerness to please stronger beings, these are the traits of domesticated creatures. They simply evolved without masters until now. Maya clenched her jaw, fighting back the urge to spit at Xel's feet. She knew she was being broadcast across what remained of human territory, a propaganda display meant to break the spirit of the resistance. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. As demonstration of their pet-like nature, Xel said, observe what happens when we introduce a stimulus. A section of the floor slid open, and a platform rose from below. Maya's heart stopped when she saw what it carried. A dog cage. Inside was a German shepherd, thin but alert, ears pricked forward. His familiar brown eyes found Maya instantly, and his tail began to wag despite the confines of his cage. Apollo, Maya whispered, the name escaping before she could stop herself. The human and this quadruped formed what they call a bond, Xel explained to the assembly. Our research suggests these attachments are deeply neurochemical. The human brain produces oxytocin, the same hormone released between human parent and offspring, when interacting with these creatures. Maya couldn't tear her eyes from Apollo. Her service dog. Her companion through 2 wars before the Vrexians came. The one she thought she'd lost when they'd bombarded her command center on Olympus Mons. Note the physiological changes, Xel observed clinically. Increased heart rate. Pupil dilation. The human is experiencing what they call emotion. Apollo whined, pushing his nose against the cage bars. The domesticated predator recognizes its master, Xel noted. Yet which is truly the master and which the pet? Both species lost this war. Both now wear our collars. Maya's hands curled into fists, but with the neural dampener active, she could barely summon the strength to remain standing. Her legs trembled with the effort. Having observed this specimen for several cycles, we have determined that humans possess no qualities of value to the Vrexian Imperium, Xel declared. They are inefficient, irrational, and driven by primitive instincts. However, they may serve as entertainments and research subjects. Xel extended a jointed appendage toward Maya. This human commanded respect among its kind. Its execution will signal finality to any lingering resistance. The chamber grew silent. Maya felt sweat trickle down her spine as she stared defiantly at Xel. She'd expected this. Had prepared herself for it. But Apollo's presence had thrown her. Why bring her dog here just to, first, a small experiment, Xel announced. Our xenobiologists wish to observe the human stress response. A Vrexian technician approached Apollo's cage with a device that resembled a cattle prod. Maya's blood turned to ice. No, she said, the word barely audible. The technician inserted the prod through the bars of the cage. Apollo growled, backing away. Stop, Maya said, louder this time. The technician activated the device, and Apollo yelped in pain. Something inside Maya snapped. 5 months of calculated compliance, of gathering intelligence, of planning for an opportunity, all of it evaporated in an instant of primal fury. Stop, she screamed, lunging toward Apollo despite knowing she couldn't reach him. 2 Vrexian guards grabbed her arms, their powerful limbs easily restraining her. But Maya wasn't struggling to break free. She was buying seconds. You claim to be scientists, she shouted at Xel. You claim to understand humans. But you've made a fundamental error in your research. Xel's sensory filaments twitched curiosity. Elaborate, the High Admiral commanded. Maya's eyes never left Apollo as she spoke, her voice steady despite her racing heart. You think our attachments to dogs make us pets? That it's a weakness. You don't understand what dogs mean to humanity. The technician paused, prod hovering near Apollo, who was now baring his teeth. We didn't domesticate dogs because we wanted pets, Maya continued. We partnered with wolves over 15,000 years ago because we recognized something in them that mirrored the best in ourselves. Loyalty. Perseverance. The pack instinct. The drive to protect. She stared directly at Xel now. You call us emotional as if it's a deficiency. But those emotions, love, attachment, rage, when what we love is threatened, they're not weaknesses. They're why we survived on a planet full of predators that were stronger and faster than us. They're why we crawled out of the mud and reached the stars. Xel's mandibles clicked rapidly. Dismissal. Poetic, but irrelevant. Your species has fallen. You think the war is over because you've captured me? Maya smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the Vrexian guards hesitate. You still don't understand humans at all. The neural dampening collar around her neck had been active for months, long enough for Maya to map its electrical patterns, to feel the microsecond delay between her resistant thoughts and the collar's suppressive pulse. Long enough to build up a tolerance that the Vrexians, in their arrogance, never considered possible. And most importantly, long enough to realize the collar was designed for the Vrexian nervous system, not the human one. As the technician moved to prod Apollo again, Maya whispered, "Checkmate," and mentally recited the string of prime numbers she'd been using as her trigger, the mathematical sequence that brought the precise surge of adrenaline and neural activity needed to overload the collar's circuits. The collar sparked and went dead. In the split second before the guards realized what had happened, Maya drove her elbow into the breathing apparatus of the Vrexian on her right, the weak point in their exoskeleton that she'd identified during her captivity. As it crumpled, Gasping, she twisted and slammed her palm up under the mandible of the second guard, where she knew the neural cluster controlling its front limbs was located. The guard's arm spasmed, its grip loosening just enough for Maya to break free. She sprinted toward Apollo's cage, knowing she had seconds at most. Alarms blared throughout the chamber. The assembled Vrexians rose in confusion, some reaching for weapons, others backing toward exits. Maya reached the cage, fingers working frantically at the latch. "I'm sorry I took so long, boy," she murmured to Apollo, who was alert and ready, sensing the change in his human. The latch clicked open, and Apollo bounded out, pressing against Maya's leg for just an instant, his way of saying he'd never doubted her. Maya grabbed the prod from the stunned technician and jammed it into the control panel beside the platform. Sparks flew as systems shorted out. The chamber's lights flickered, plunging sections into darkness. "This way," Maya told Apollo, moving with purpose toward a maintenance tunnel she'd spotted during her entry, the kind of detail that 5 months of captivity had taught her to notice and memorize. The kind of attention to environment that humans had evolved over millennia of being the smaller predator. As they slipped into the tunnel, chaos erupting behind them, Maya allowed herself a grim smile. The Vrexians had made a critical error. They'd studied humans as specimens rather than opponents. They'd documented human behaviors but never truly understood human nature. And most fatally, they'd underestimated the lengths to which a human would go to protect what they loved. The war wasn't over. It was about to enter a new phase, one where the Vrexians would learn why, throughout Earth's violent history, the most dangerous human was never the strongest or the most heavily armed. It was the one fighting to protect their family. Lieutenant Commander Kiran Sharma had been monitoring communications from the Resistance's hidden bunker on Titan when the Vrexian broadcast began. He watched in bitter silence as they paraded Commander Reyes before their assembly, his fingers digging into the armrests of his chair. "They're making a mistake," he muttered to Dr. Eliza Chen, the xenobiologist who'd been working alongside him since the fall of Earth. "Which part?" Eliza asked, her eyes never leaving the screen. "All of it. But especially," Kiran broke off as the camera panned to show Apollo in the cage. "Oh, they really shouldn't have done that." Eliza frowned. "The dog? You think that's their mistake?" "I served under Reyes during the Europa campaign," Kiran said, leaning forward. "Before the Vrexians. She once walked 5 kilometers through a methane storm with 3 broken ribs to recover Apollo when he got separated during a reconnaissance mission." On screen, they watched as Maya lunged toward her dog, was restrained, and then began speaking to Xel. "What's she doing?" someone asked from the back of the bunker. "Buying time," Kiran replied, recognition dawning on his face. "She's had that collar on for months. If anyone could figure out how to." The feed suddenly destabilized, the image breaking apart into pixels before cutting to an emergency Vrexian symbol. The bunker erupted in confused voices until Kiran stood, raising his hands for silence. "Listen to me," he said, his voice carrying the authority that had made him Reyes's second-in-command before they were separated during the Mars evacuation. "I believe Commander Reyes just created an opportunity, but we'll have a narrow window to act." He turned to their communications specialist. "Harper, send the coded alert to all resistance cells. Execute Protocol Lazarus." Harper's fingers flew across the console. "Sir, Protocol Lazarus was designed as a last resort. It exposes our remaining sleeper agents and we're past last resorts," Kiran interrupted. "The Vrexians think they've won. That's exactly when we need to hit them." He faced the assembled Group 37 survivors representing what remained of Earth's organized military resistance. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all exhausted, many injured, all carrying the psychological weight of a war they appeared to be losing. "The Vrexians have been studying us," Kiran said, "cataloging our behaviors, analyzing our weaknesses. But they've misinterpreted what they've seen. They think our emotional attachments make us weak, irrational. What they don't understand is that those attachments are why we're still here." He pulled up a holographic display of the solar system, highlighting Vrexian positions in red. "They've extended their supply lines across our entire system. They've established bases on Mars, Venus, and several Jovian moons. Their hive ships are positioned near Earth and the major mining operations on Mercury. They think they're consolidating their victory. Kieran zoomed in on the hive ships. But they're vulnerable. Their command structure is hierarchical and rigid. Their technology is superior to ours, but their tactics are predictable, evolved for warfare against enemies similar to themselves. Eliza stepped forward. My team has been analyzing the biological samples we recovered. The Vrexians may look formidable, but they have critical weaknesses. Their exoskeletons, while tough, have flexibility points that can be exploited. Their respiratory system requires specific atmospheric compositions. And most importantly, their neural networks are susceptible to certain electromagnetic frequencies that wouldn't affect humans. Kieran nodded. Which is why Protocol Lazarus might actually work. Our agents embedded within their labor camps have been gathering components. If Commander Reyes has escaped, the Vrexians will commit significant resources to recapturing her, creating thin spots in their security network. You're betting everything on the assumption that she escaped, Harper pointed out. Kieran's expression softened for a moment. I'm betting everything on Maya Reyes and her dog. And having seen what they've accomplished together before, I like those odds. As if in response to his words, an encrypted communication pinged on their main console. Harper quickly verified and decoded it, her eyes widening. It's from Commander Reyes, she said in disbelief. She's transmitting from a commandeered Vrexian scout vessel. She's requesting rendezvous coordinates. The bunker fell silent for a heartbeat before erupting in cheers. Kieran raised his hand again, quickly restoring order. Send the coordinates for Echo Base, he instructed. And tell her Apollo better have his own seat in that ship. 7 hours later, Maya guided the stolen Vrexian vessel into the concealed hangar built into one of Titan's methane lakes. The ship had not been designed for human pilots, but Maya had spent her captivity studying Vrexian technology, memorizing control layouts whenever she was transported between facilities. Apollo sat beside her in the co-pilot's seat, alert but calm. He'd remained by her side through their escape, helping her navigate maintenance tunnels, warning her of approaching guards, and at one critical moment, creating a diversion that had allowed her to access the shipyard. As the hangar doors sealed behind them and atmosphere flooded the chamber, Maya finally allowed herself to exhale fully. Her muscles ached from exertion and lingering effects of the neural dampener. Her stolen Vrexian garments were ill-fitting and uncomfortable. But she was free, and more importantly, she had information that could change the course of the war. When the ship's ramp lowered, she was greeted by a small contingent led by a face she had feared she might never see again. Commander Reyes, Kieran said formally, saluting, though his broad smile betrayed his relief. Permission to hug the hell out of you, ma'am. Maya laughed, a sound she hadn't made in months, and embraced her former second-in-command. Permission enthusiastically granted, Lieutenant Commander. Apollo bounded down the ramp, circling the reunion with happy energy before allowing the others to greet him. I knew you'd find a way out, Kieran said as they walked toward the base's command center, Apollo trotting alongside them. Though I didn't expect you to broadcast your escape to the entire system. That wasn't intentional, Maya admitted. But it might work in our favor. The Vrexians are facing something they've never encountered before: embarrassment. Their perfect victory narrative has been compromised. In the command center, Maya was introduced to the survivors she didn't know and reunited with those she did. Dr. Chen immediately wanted to examine her, concerned about the effects of the neural dampener, but Maya insisted on briefing the team first. The Vrexians aren't just occupying our system, she explained, bringing up the intel she'd downloaded during her escape. They're terraforming it. They're altering the atmospheric composition of every viable body to suit their biology. Earth is already experiencing the early stages. Murmurs of dismay spread through the room. But, Maya continued, their process requires massive environmental regulators positioned at strategic points. These machines are converting our atmosphere molecule by molecule. They're heavily guarded, but they're also the linchpin of the Vrexian occupation. Kieran studied the schematics. If we could disable these regulators, we'd force them to abandon the terraforming or commit more resources to protecting the machines, Maya finished. Either way, we create opportunities. But we don't have the firepower to take on these facilities directly, Harper pointed out. Our remaining vessels are outdated and outnumbered. Maya exchanged a look with Kieran. Tell her about Protocol Lazarus. Kieran explained the desperate plan they'd been developing: a simultaneous strike by sleeper agents against Vrexian communications relays, followed by targeted electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to disrupt Vrexian neural patterns. The EMPs won't kill them, Dr. Chen clarified. But they'll incapacitate them temporarily long enough for our agents to sabotage critical systems. It's a start, Maya acknowledged. But we need something bigger. Something that affects their entire command structure. She turned to Apollo, who had settled at her feet, ever vigilant. And I think I know what it might be. She explained what she'd learned about Vrexian social dynamics during her captivity. Unlike humans, who formed flexible, adaptive social structures, Vrexians operated on rigid hierarchical principles. Every action, every decision flowed from the top down. Individual initiative was not merely discouraged, it was neurologically impossible for most Vrexians. Their entire society functions like a neural network, Maya said. Each Vrexian is connected to the collective consciousness of their hive ship. The higher ranking the individual, the more influence they exert on the network. If we could disrupt this network at its highest levels, the entire command structure would collapse, Kieran finished, understanding dawning on his face. But how do we get to their leadership? The hive ships are impenetrable. Maya smiled, and there was a dangerous gleam in her eye that reminded everyone present why she had been humanity's most effective commander against the Vrexian invasion. We don't have to get to them, she said. They're going to invite us in. She looked down at Apollo, who perked his ears at her attention. And they're going to learn exactly what happens when you threaten a dog's owner, and that owner happens to command the most stubborn, innovative, and downright ornery species in the solar system. High Admiral Xel had never experienced failure before. The concept was almost foreign to Vrexian consciousness. Their hive-mind connection ensured that errors were immediately identified and corrected before they could propagate into true failure. Yet as Xel stood before the Sovereign Hive Council aboard the Imperium's flagship, the acidic taste of failure coated their mouthparts. The human commander's escape was unprecedented, Xel explained, sensory filaments flat against their carapace in submission. Our neural dampeners have proven 100% effective on all previously encountered species. The Sovereign, whose massive form dominated the council chamber, emanated waves of displeasure that rippled through the hive mind. Every Vrexian connected to the network could feel the echoes of that displeasure, a collective shame that spurred immediate action. The human resistance has launched coordinated attacks on 17 separate installations since the escape, the military overseer reported. Our communication relays in the asteroid belt have been compromised. 3 atmospheric regulators on the human homeworld have malfunctioned. These are not random acts of desperation, this is a strategic offensive. Xel's mandibles clicked in agitation. Impossible. We destroyed their command structure. We captured their leaders. We reduced their military capabilities to insignificance. Yet they persist, the Sovereign's translated voice resonated through the chamber. This Maya Reyes has become a symbol. Her image spreads through human enclaves. Her escape is characterized in their communications as evidence of inevitable victory. A temporary symbolic victory only, Xel insisted. We will recapture her. We will make an example. You attempted this already, the Sovereign interrupted. It resulted in humiliation for the Imperium. No, we require a different approach. The massive alien shifted, its exoskeleton creaking with the movement. These humans, they function differently from hierarchical species. Each seems capable of independent action, yet they coordinate effectively without constant neural connection. The xenobiologist stepped forward. Sovereign, our research suggests humans operate on what they call trust and shared values. They follow leaders not because of neurological compulsion but because of a belief in those leaders. It is inefficient but surprisingly resilient in crisis situations. Then we must attack this belief, the Sovereign decided. If they cannot be controlled through hierarchical means, we will offer them what they perceive as choice. The plan that emerged was elegant in its simplicity. The Vrexians would broadcast an ultimatum across the system. Maya Reyes would surrender herself willingly to the flagship within 30 rotation cycles, or the Vrexians would accelerate the terraforming of Earth to lethal levels, rendering the planet uninhabitable for humans within days rather than the gradual transition originally planned. They value their homeworld irrationally, the sovereign noted. And they value sacrifice. This Reyes has demonstrated the human tendency toward self-destruction for collective benefit. She will come. Xel's sensory filaments twitched with uncertainty. And when she does, we will eliminate her publicly, demonstrating the futility of resistance. And then we will accelerate terraforming regardless. The human species has proven too adaptable, too unpredictable. They cannot be permitted to survive as a potential threat to the Imperium. None of the assembled Vrexians questioned this genocidal decree. None could, even if individual doubts might exist. The hive-mind connection left no room for dissent once the sovereign had decided. What none of them realized was that their entire conversation, conducted through a mixture of verbal communication and neural network exchanges, had been monitored. Deep within the flagship's ventilation system, a small device no larger than a human thumbnail recorded and transmitted every detail of the Vrexians' plan to a resistance vessel hiding in the shadow of Phobos. The device had been planted by a maintenance drone that had been reprogrammed by a human engineer working in a Vrexian labor camp on Ganymede. The engineer had been inspired to this act of sabotage upon hearing of Commander Reyes's escape. She had never met Reyes personally, had no direct connection to the resistance leadership, yet had risked her life on her own initiative. It was exactly this decentralized, individual capacity for action that the Vrexians consistently failed to understand about their human adversaries. "They're going to kill everyone regardless," Maya said flatly as she and her command team reviewed the intercepted Vrexian communication. "This isn't a negotiation, it's a trap with genocide as a backup plan." "Then we don't engage," Harper argued. "We continue with Protocol Lazarus, target their atmospheric regulators, and—" "No," Maya interrupted. "We accept their invitation." Silence fell over the command center. Even Apollo, resting at Maya's feet, lifted his head at the tension in her voice. "Commander," Kieran began carefully, "with all due respect, that's exactly what they want." "I'm counting on it," Maya replied. "But we're going to give them more than they bargained for." She pointed to the holographic display of the Vrexian flagship. "Their hive mind is their greatest strength. It gives them perfect coordination, instant communication, unified purpose. But it's also their greatest vulnerability." Dr. Chen frowned. "The flagship's neural network hub is buried deep within the vessel, surrounded by layers of security. Even if we could reach it, we have no way to disrupt something so alien to our technology." "We don't need to disrupt their technology," Maya said. "We need to disrupt their thinking." She tapped a section of the hologram. "During my captivity, I observed how Vrexian neural networks function. They don't just communicate information, they synchronize emotional and physiological states. When the sovereign feels displeasure, every connected Vrexian experiences a proportional echo of that displeasure." Kieran's eyes widened as he began to understand. "You want to introduce something into their network?" "Exactly," Maya confirmed. "Dr. Chen's team has been working on electromagnetic frequencies that affect Vrexian neural patterns. What if we could amplify those effects and broadcast them directly into their hive mind?" Dr. Chen looked skeptical. "The signal would need to be incredibly powerful, and it would have to be initiated from within their network." "We have no way to—" "I do," Maya interrupted, her hand dropping to scratch behind Apollo's ears. "Their neural dampeners are designed to interface with the subject's nervous system. They're a bridge between individual biology and Vrexian technology." Understanding dawned on Dr. Chen's face. "The collar you wore, it was connected to their network." "And I spent 5 months mapping how that connection works," Maya confirmed. "If I return wearing a similar collar, but one we've modified, you could introduce a cascading feedback loop into their entire command structure," Kieran finished. "But Maya, the risk is acceptable given the alternative," she said firmly. "I escaped once. I can do it again. Especially with the right backup." She looked down at Apollo, who had risen to attention, sensing his human's resolve. And this time, we bring the fight to them. Over the next 15 days, the resistance executed the most ambitious plan of the war. While Maya prepared to answer the Vrexians' ultimatum, Protocol Lazarus expanded. Sleeper agents sabotaged atmospheric regulators across the system. Resistance fighters launched hit-and-run attacks on Vrexian outposts, drawing forces away from the flagship. Dr. Chen and her team worked tirelessly to modify a captured neural dampener collar, transforming it from an instrument of control into a weapon. The plan required perfect timing, coordinated action across millions of kilometers of space, and more than a little luck. But most of all, it required the quality that humans had evolved over centuries of being both predator and prey: adaptability. When the deadline arrived, Maya Reyes piloted a small, unarmed transport toward the Vrexian flagship, Apollo by her side. She wore the modified collar, which to Vrexian scans would appear identical to the one she had escaped. In her mind, she rehearsed the neural patterns that would activate the device at precisely the right moment. "Ready for this, boy?" she asked Apollo, who pressed his muzzle against her hand in response. The German Shepherd had been equipped with his own modifications, a specially designed harness that contained both defensive capabilities and a neural interface system. Where Vrexian saw a pet, Maya saw her most trusted teammate. As their ship was drawn into the flagship's docking bay, Maya took a deep breath and centered herself. The Vrexians thought they understood humans. They had studied them, catalogued them, analyzed their behaviors and biological responses. But they had made a fundamental error: they had studied humans as subjects rather than equals. They had observed human actions without comprehending human potential. They were about to learn the difference. The docking bay of the Vrexian flagship swarmed with armed guards. Maya's small transport settled onto the deck with a soft hiss of hydraulics. Through the viewport, she counted at least 30 Vrexian warriors, their exoskeletons enhanced with combat modifications. "Quite the welcome committee," she murmured to Apollo, who stood alert beside her, his muscles tense beneath the specialized harness. "Remember the plan. No heroics until we reach the central chamber." The ship's ramp lowered, and Maya stepped out with her hands raised, Apollo at her heel. The Vrexian guards raised their weapons but didn't fire. Their orders were to deliver her alive to the Sovereign. "I've come as requested," Maya announced, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "In exchange for the safety of Earth." The lead guard approached, towering over her. Its mandibles clicked as it scanned her with a handheld device, paying particular attention to the collar around her neck. "Neural dampener detected," it reported to its superior. "Configuration matches escape specifications." Recalibrating. Maya felt the collar tighten slightly against her skin. The sensation triggered a flash of panic, but she controlled her breathing. The modifications Dr. Chen had made were undetectable until activated, designed to work with the Vrexian technology rather than against it. "The quadruped was not part of the arrangement," another guard noted, gesturing toward Apollo with its weapon. "The dog comes with me, or I don't go at all," Maya said firmly. "You want your public execution? He's part of the package." The guards conferred through their neural link, mandibles twitching in the subtle patterns that Maya had learned to read during her captivity. They were uncertain; deviating from orders required authorization from higher in the hierarchy. Finally, the lead guard gestured with its upper limbs. "The Sovereign has approved. The animal may accompany you." Maya allowed herself to be surrounded by the guard detail as they escorted her through the massive vessel. Apollo stayed close, occasionally brushing against her leg, a reminder that she wasn't alone. The flagship's interior was a marvel of alien engineering, with curved, chitinous walls that seemed almost organic, pulsating with bioluminescent patterns that Maya recognized as data flows through the hive mind. They passed hundreds of Vrexians going about their duties, many pausing to observe the human prisoner. Maya maintained a posture of defeat, shoulders slumped, gaze downward, the image of someone who had surrendered to the inevitable. Only her eyes remained active, noting pathway junctions, environmental systems, security checkpoints. After 20 minutes of transit through the labyrinthine vessel, they arrived at an enormous chamber that served as the flagship's nerve center. Unlike the amphitheater where Maya had been displayed as a captive, this space was functional rather than ceremonial. Curved workstations operated by Vrexian technicians surrounded a central platform where a massive figure awaited. The sovereign of the Vrexian Imperium was 3 times the size of an average warrior, its exoskeleton adorned with bioluminescent patterns denoting its supreme rank. Sensory filaments extended 2 meters from its head casing, constantly sampling the air and the neural energies of those around it. Maya Reyes, the sovereign's translated voice boomed across the chamber. You have made a wise decision. Maya was pushed forward to stand before the platform. Apollo remained perfectly at her side, his training keeping him calm despite the alien environment. I came to ensure the safety of Earth, Maya replied. You promised to halt the terraforming if I surrendered. The sovereign's sensory filaments undulated in what Maya recognized as amusement. Your belief in such promises demonstrates why your species was destined for subjugation. Sentiment overrides logic. Individual sacrifice for collective benefit, a flawed evolutionary strategy. Maya had expected this betrayal, but she forced indignation into her voice. You lied. You intend to accelerate the terraforming regardless. Of course, the sovereign confirmed. Your species has proven too unpredictable to incorporate into the Imperium. The resources of your system will be put to more efficient use once purged of human presence. As the sovereign spoke, Maya noticed Xel among the high-ranking officers flanking the platform. The admiral who had overseen her captivity seemed diminished somehow, its posture suggesting the disgrace it had suffered after her escape. Before your execution, the sovereign continued, your neural patterns will be thoroughly analyzed. Despite your primitiveness, your species has demonstrated unexpected qualities. These will be studied before your kind is eradicated. Maya looked up at the towering alien ruler, her eyes suddenly sharp with focus rather than fear. You know what I find interesting? You call us primitive, yet you've made the most primitive mistake of all. You've cornered a predator and expected submission. The sovereign's sensory filaments stiffened. You are not a predator here. You wear our collar. You stand surrounded by our warriors. Your planet burns under our machines. True, Maya acknowledged, her hand dropping to rest on Apollo's head. But you've forgotten something fundamental about human history. We didn't become Earth's dominant species because we were the strongest. She smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even the sovereign pause. We became dominant because we were the most persistent. Because we made alliances with other humans, with other species. Because we learned to turn apparent weaknesses into strengths. At her touch, Apollo's harness emitted a soft, barely audible pulse. To the Vrexians, it registered as nothing more than a minor power fluctuation. To Maya, it was confirmation that Kiran and the Resistance had executed their part of the plan. Throughout the solar system, at precisely this moment, sleeper agents were activating EMP devices specifically calibrated to Vrexian neural frequencies. You see a collar, Maya continued, her fingers moving to the neural dampener around her neck. I see a direct connection to your hive mind. The sovereign sensed danger too late. Stop her, it commanded, but the neural signal carried something else with it, a spike of fear, an emotion alien to the normally controlled Vrexian consciousness. Maya closed her eyes and activated the modified collar, sending Dr. Chen's carefully designed feedback loop directly into the heart of the Vrexian neural network. The collar hummed against her skin, growing hot as it transmitted the cascade of contradictory signals, emotional impulses, and mathematical paradoxes designed to overwhelm the rigid structures of the hive mind. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Throughout the chamber, Vrexians clutched at their sensory organs, mandibles clicking in distress. Some collapsed, their nervous systems overwhelmed by the conflicting impulses. Others turned on each other, suddenly unable to distinguish friend from foe as the hierarchy recognition functions of their minds collapsed. The sovereign writhed on its platform, its massive body convulsing as it tried to reassert control over the fracturing network. What have you done? It managed through the translation system. I introduced humanity to your network, Maya answered, removing the now burned-out collar from her neck. All the messy, contradictory, adaptive chaos that makes us who we are. Your rigid thinking couldn't handle it. Throughout the flagship and across Vrexian installations throughout the solar system, command structures were collapsing. The perfectly ordered hive mind was experiencing something it had no defense against: individualism. Vrexians who had never made an independent decision in their lives were suddenly cut off from the collective guidance, experiencing autonomy for the first time. Maya nodded to Apollo, who activated the second phase of his harness. A localized EMP disabled the nearest Vrexian weapons and communication devices. In the confusion, Maya stripped a fallen guard of its side arm and moved deliberately toward the navigation controls. "This is Commander Reyes to all resistance cells," she said into the communication system, broadcasting across all frequencies. Phase 1 complete. Execute Phase 2. Across the solar system, the carefully coordinated counterattack began. Resistance fighters who had been waiting for this signal launched simultaneous assaults on atmospheric regulators. Sleeper agents in labor camps initiated uprisings. Hidden vessels emerged from concealment to strike at suddenly uncoordinated Vrexian ships. On the flagship's command deck, Maya worked quickly at the alien controls, implementing the override sequences she had memorized during her captivity. Apollo stood guard, growling at any Vrexian that approached too closely, though most were still incapacitated by the neural disruption. "What are you doing?" Xel managed to ask, having dragged itself to the console. The Admiral's movements were uncoordinated, its neural network connections severely compromised. "I'm giving you a choice," Maya replied, not pausing in her work. "Something your rigid hierarchy never allowed. The flagship's engines are now locked on a course toward Saturn's outer rings. You have 4 hours to evacuate your people to escape pods." She turned to face the struggling Admiral. "You can return to your homeworld. Tell them that the Sol system is off-limits to the Imperium. That humans aren't what you thought we were. The Sovereign will never permit retreat," Xel argued, though its voice lacked conviction. Maya gestured to where the massive alien ruler lay immobile, its nervous system overloaded. "The Sovereign isn't making decisions anymore. You are. Each individual Vrexian is. That's the gift we're giving you, the same chaotic freedom that makes humanity what it is." She stepped back from the console, the reprogramming complete. 4 hours. Then this ship and all its hive mind technology will be destroyed. What remains of your fleet can stay and face the same fate, or leave our system forever. Through pain-blurred vision, Xel studied the human commander and her canine companion. "You could destroy us now. Why offer escape?" Maya knelt beside Apollo, checking his harness to ensure the emergency beacon was active. "Because that's another thing you never understood about humans. We can be ruthless when threatened, but we're capable of mercy when victory is assured." She met the alien's compound eyes. "And because the best way to ensure you never return is to send survivors home with the story of how badly you underestimated us." As evacuation alarms began to sound throughout the flagship, Maya and Apollo made their way to a predetermined extraction point where Kieran would rendezvous with a stealth shuttle. Behind them, the Vrexian command structure continued to disintegrate, individual aliens making individual choices for the first time in their existence. Some chose violence, lashing out in confusion. Many chose flight, rushing toward escape pods. A few, including Xel, chose to observe the humans with new understanding, recognizing that the emotional connections they had dismissed as weakness were, in fact, a different kind of strength. 3 weeks later, Maya stood at the viewport of the Resistance headquarters on Titan, watching as the last Vrexian ships disappeared into the darkness beyond Saturn. Apollo sat beside her, his head resting against her leg as she absently scratched behind his ears. "They're really leaving," Kieran said, joining her at the viewport. "All of them. The atmospheric regulators on Earth have been deactivated. Cleanup crews estimate the planet will return to normal composition within 6 months." "And the labor camps?" Maya asked. "Liberated. Dr. Chen is coordinating medical teams to treat the survivors." Maya nodded, still watching the stars. "How many Vrexians chose to stay?" "About 300, Kieran reported. Mostly scientists and lower caste workers. Those with the least connection to the hive mind. They've requested asylum and offered to help repair the damage to our ecosystems." "Granted," Maya said without hesitation. "They're experiencing true freedom for the first time. That makes them allies, not enemies." Kieran studied his commander's profile. You know, in all our planning, I never really believed we'd win. Not completely. I thought the best we could hope for was some kind of stalemate. Maya smiled, looking down at Apollo. That's because you were thinking like a military strategist. Calculating force ratios, technology gaps, tactical advantages. She knelt to embrace her dog, who responded with an enthusiastic lick to her cheek. The Vrexians made the same mistake. They saw our emotional attachments as irrational, our diversity as inefficiency, our individuality as weakness. She stood, watching as the final pinprick of light that was the Vrexian fleet winked out of sight. They never understood that the chaos they despised is exactly what made us unbeatable. Human history is the story of adaptation, of forming bonds that transcend logic, of fighting hardest when protecting what we love. So what you're saying, Kieran concluded with a smile, is that they never should have threatened your dog. Maya laughed, a sound of genuine joy that echoed through the command center. Exactly. That was their first mistake. She turned from the viewport, Apollo at her heel, ready to begin the work of rebuilding. Let's make sure it was their last. Outside the viewport, Earth shone as a blue jewel against the blackness of space, its atmosphere already beginning to heal. Humanity had faced its greatest challenge and emerged not just surviving, but stronger, not because they were the most powerful species in the galaxy, but because they understood something the Vrexians never could. True strength comes not from dominance but from connection. As the Resistance headquarters hummed with activity, plans being made for reconstruction and recovery, Maya felt a profound sense of peace. The war was over. The alliance of human and canine, the partnership that had begun 15,000 years ago on the plains of prehistoric Earth, had proven more powerful than all the technology and rigid thinking of an interstellar empire. The Vrexians had laughed at human pets. They wouldn't make that mistake again.